Imagine a cloud of political ideas floating around: freedom, justice, peace, ecology, family, state. On their own, these floating signifiers have no fixed meaning. A conservative, a socialist, and a fascist can all talk about freedom, but they mean totally different things. So, what stops these meanings from sliding around endlessly? What quilts them together into a single, stable ideological field like communism or fascism? Zizek, following the political theorists Laclau and Mouffe, says the answer is a special kind of word, a nodal point, what Lacan calls a point de capitone or quilting point. This is a master word that fixes the meaning of all the others. For example, if the master word is communism, then freedom means freedom from capitalist exploitation. Justice means the dictatorship of the proletariat. The state means a tool of class rule that will eventually wither away. Ecology means fighting the destruction of nature caused by profit. The master word doesn't just describe these things, it retroactively creates their identity within that specific ideology. The ideological struggle is a fight over which master word will quilt the floating signifiers. To understand this master word, Zizek uses the philosophy of Kripke. Kripke asked, how does a name like Moses or gold actually refer to a thing? One common answer is descriptivism. The name gold refers to whatever object has a certain set of properties: yellow, shiny, heavy, malleable. The meaning is in the description. Kripke argued against this with the anti descriptivism. He said, a name is linked to an object by an initial act of baptism, someone pointing and saying, this is gold, and then a chain of communication. Even if all the properties we associate with gold changed, for example, we discovered it was actually a blue liquid, the name gold would still refer to the same original substance. The name is a rigid designator. It points to the same thing in every possible world, no matter how its properties change. Zizek applies this to ideology. The master word, communism, America, democracy, is a rigid designator. It is a pure signifier without a fixed positive meaning. Its function is not to describe but to guarantee identity. What makes something truly American? It is not a checklist of properties like being Christian or owning a gun. The answer is whatever is designated by the master signifier America. This is the ideological trick. We experience the master word as the richest, most meaningful term: God, nation, party, etc. But in reality, it is a pure empty form. It is a signifier without a signifier. Its only content is the purely performative act of naming itself. The anti Semite doesn't hate the Jew because of a list of negative traits. The list of traits exists because the Jew is designated by the master signifier Jew. The meaning is generated backwards from the name to the properties. Lacan's graph of desire is a diagram that shows how this quilting works. At its most basic level, a pre-symbolic intention, a raw impulse, moves along a chain of signifiers, words. It does not find its meaning at the end of the chain, but at a certain point where it doubles back and pins down the meaning of the signifiers that came before. Meaning is always retroactive. You don't understand the first word of a sentence until you hear the last word. A detective doesn't understand the first clue until he solves the crime at the end of the story. The meaning of a historical event is never clear when it happens, it is fixed later by what comes after. This retroactivity is the engine of transference, the illusion that the meaning we just created was actually there, hidden from the beginning. The Marxist knows that the exploitation was already hidden in the first act of commodity exchange, even though it only becomes visible later. This illusion is necessary for ideology to work. To become a subject, you must identify with something. Zizek distinguishes two types: imaginary identification, that is, ideal ego. This is identifying with an image of yourself that you like. It is the cool hero you imitate, the glamorous movie star you want to look like. This is constituted identification, the result of a process. Second is symbolic identification, that is, ego ideal. This is much more important. This is identifying with the place from which you are being observed. It is the gaze, not a real person, but a symbolic point of judgment for which you want to appear likable. For example, a teenager rebels against his parents for adopting a punk image, imaginary identification. But for whom is he performing this rebellion? He is still identifying with the parent's gaze, the point of authority he is trying to provoke. He is still defined by them. The true shift happens when he changes his symbolic identification, the very place from which he judges himself. This explains why a dictator can be popular for his very weaknesses. People don't identify with a strong heroic image that is imaginary. They identify with the place of the flawed, struggling leader, which is symbolic. They see themselves in his failure. The identification is with the gaze that finds failure acceptable. After all this quilting and identification, a gap remains. This gap is the question, "Che vuoi?" Italian for "what do you want?" This is the question the other, society, authority, our partner addresses to us. The other says, "You are a citizen, you are a teacher, you are a husband." We accept this identity, but then we hear the unspoken question behind it. Okay, you are all that, but what do you really want? What is the secret desire driving you? What do you really mean by what you are saying? This question is terrifying because it has no answer. It points to a void, a lack in the other itself. The big other, the symbolic order, is not just complete. It is inconsistent. It asks us a question it cannot answer itself. Our own desire is, in a way, a defense against this unbearable question. Since we cannot answer the question, "What do you want?" we build a fantasy to fill the void. Fantasy is an imagined scenario that stages our desire. It answers the unanswerable question. For the anti Semite, the fantasy is the Jewish conspiracy. The answer to "what does the Jew really want?" is a whole story of world domination and corrupt scheming. This fantasy is crucial because it doesn't just represent desire, it constitutes it. It teaches us how to desire. Without the fantasy of the cheating wife, the jealous husband wouldn't know what to do with his jealousy. Without the fantasy of the corrupt Jew, the fascist wouldn't know what to hate. Fantasy acts as a screen, a cushion that protects us from the terrifying void of the other's desire. It covers up the fact that society doesn't exist, that the social order is built on an impossible antagonistic kernel. Zizek uses anti Semitism as his prime example of how this all works. First, the master signifier. The word Jew quilts a whole ideology. Second, the fantasy. The fantasy of the Jewish plot answers the question, "Che vuoi?" It gives a positive, visible form to the hidden cause of all social problems. Third, the real antagonism. Society is inherently split and antagonistic, rich, poor, boss, worker. It cannot achieve perfect unity. 4. The ideological displacement. Anti Semitism displaces this internal structural impossibility onto an external figure. It says society could be perfect and harmonious if only the Jews were not corrupting it. The Jew becomes the embodiment of the social blockage. The truth is the exact opposite. The Jew is not the cause of the social antagonism, the Jew is the symptom of it. The Jew is the positive form that the social split takes. To go through the fantasy means to stop chasing the imaginary Jew and to recognize that the real enemy is the impossible structure of society itself. You must identify with the symptom. That is, you must recognize that the supposed excess or deformity, like the Jew in anti Semitism or the worker in capitalism, is not an alien intruder but the very point where the truth of the system erupts. In short, Vuoi teaches us that ideology works by a master word that retroactively fixes floating meanings. It traps us with the unanswerable question of the other's desire, and we respond to this trap by constructing fantasies that fill the void, blaming a scapegoat, the symptom, for an impossibility that belongs to the social system itself.